Well, one of the good things that has come out of the COVID era is that more and more people are seeking answers outside of big pharma and big medico. And guess what? They're getting healthier and they're actually healing. A new documentary reveals a groundbreaking study that parasites cause cancer and many other diseases. There's a reason that the COVID regime didn't want people using ivermectin. Dr. Lee Merritt joins us today for an in-depth discussion into some of these amazing discoveries into parasites and cancer and more. But first, we're going to show you the trailer to Parasite Movie, which you can watch for free right now on parasitemovie.com. Here's the trailer, followed by Dr. Lee Merritt.
We get sick because of three things primarily. We get sick because of electromagnetic radiation, because of poisons that they put into the environment, and because of parasites.
The CDC reports right now a third of Americans have parasites, and yet not a single medical doctor in America even knows parasites exist in this country.
Well, if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about.
There's a general overlay of falsehood overlying science in our world today.
And they are covering it up. Cancer, illnesses, all of it. It's all parasites.
Because I represent science.
Dr. Lee Merritt, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
It's been a while since our last discussion during the very, very dark days of the COVID era. And I mean, so much has happened since then. And I think one of the best things that we've seen is people moving completely away from big pharma, and so many truths about the medical industry and alternative cures for things being exposed. And I guess that's what the Parasite Movie is all about. So talk to us a little bit about just since, over the past year, how you've seen this evolution in people's understanding of medicine.
Right. Well, when I first started talking about parasites, and I started because I saw these military guys, and I'm former military. When I talked to the guys that were still in the military, the doctor friends that I'd made, they were telling me that the active duty that took the vaccine were then showing up not just with one cancer like we saw years ago. I mean, young people get cancer every once in a while, but not like this. Suddenly they're showing up with multiple metastases all over the place.
Yeah.
And it started me thinking, and I started talking to people, and I said, what do you think's going on? Do you really think cancer has changed its stripes in 2021? Or is there something else? Is it just knocking down our immune system? Because when you look at the history of vaccines in general, it's been a scam since Edward Jenner started this in the end of the 1700s. And every time that through all that history, the doctors that really were paying attention, and initially it was the university doctors back in England, they said, we never saw cancer like this until you started doing these stupid vaccines, the smallpox vaccination. Started with smallpox. And it just ramped up through the years. And it was the same three things. We would see pulmonary problems like tuberculosis broke out, cancer, and heart disease. And so we're seeing the same three things now. We saw the same three things in the 1950s when we had an outbreak. We never used to have children's cancer until then. But as we started adding more and more vaccines to the childhood panel, we're seeing so many more diseases. And now we're seeing things we never saw of those, more than those three, because of the new technology involved in these vaccines. But that's why we have to look at that and look at this whole issue of cancer breaking out. How can that work? And one of the ways, the reason I kind of came to this conclusion was, besides all the other literature I can cite and the facts, the military goes to places where the food supply is not necessarily the best. They're drinking water that may not be pure. They're crawling through swamps and things. And so they're probably getting more parasites into them from their lifestyle than the average person, and what happens in parasites is that the parasites come into your body and they get encysted, and then your body takes care of them with its immune system. But if it drops its immune system suddenly, then these things start coming out and they grow and they make these masses that then we call metastases. I think that's what's going on. But in any case, when I started talking about this and trying to put the facts together, at first it was sit down, shut up, even by my doctor friends. This is stupid. We don't want to talk to you about this anymore. But now, but you know, and I'm not saying it's just because of me. There's other people out there talking. I start seeing, number one, my own videos coming back. I found an old medical book that shows how they said in long time ago that cancer was parasites. And I put that on Telegram, and that came back to me from somebody seeing it somewhere. So suddenly people are starting to realize, hey, maybe it's the big con. Maybe we've been scammed. And the other thing that happened, and this was before all the COVID stuff, we had people who discovered that they could treat their cancer successfully with fenbendazole, and fenbendazole is a parasite medicine.
I was just about to bring that topic up with you because we just covered this on Media Blackout this week. Can fenbendazole cure cancer? And there was a case series that revealed what could be a game-changing discovery. 3 people in extremely dire circumstances basically achieving complete recovery with fenbendazole. And there was actually a gentleman, we covered in this article, there was a gentleman from Oklahoma who credited his miraculous cancer recovery to fenbendazole. And he basically was told, Dr. Merritt, this is from 2019, he was told, go home and die, make arrangements to die. And he used fenbendazole, the pet medicine, and completely recovered, and he's still alive today.
Right. And it's really funny when you look at the NIH, these guys are doing all these studies on, now that they've kind of gotten this word, they're doing all these studies on parasite medicine and cancer, and they all seem to work. I mean, to some degree, everything they're trying seems to work. And they've got multiple different medicines, from nitazoxanide to fenbendazole. And in the past, we knew that hydroxychloroquine actually seemed to decrease cancer among the people that used it for chronic autoimmune disease. So there's been a lot of little hints over the years that this was true, but it wasn't until we had a big population that suddenly had an outbreak of this turbo cancer after the vaccine. It wasn't so, there wasn't an easy way to look at this. A lot of people weren't looking at it away from the organized medicine that really don't, they don't really want to find a cancer cure because this is a huge money to treat cancer. So
and they want mRNA injections to cure cancer, the same injections that cause the cancer. They want to introduce that to cure the cancer. In fact, Dr. Merritt, I saw a recent, and I was just speaking with someone this week about this, I saw a recent story coming out of Australia from a man who reportedly cured his cancer with a personalized vaccine that was mRNA. They personalized it for him, and all of a sudden he's cancer-free. I don't believe it for a second.
No, I don't either. See, that's the kind of, it just reeks of an intelligence program moment. I mean, they want you to think they're not completely criminals. They want you to think that they're on the right track. Quite frankly, this mRNA has been touted for a long time. And in a bigger picture, what happened to Fort Detrick? When we shut down our bioweapons program, we turned it into a cancer research center. Cancer research, if you look at it, have we cured cancer? Have we even made it a lot better? If what we call improvements is really just better diagnosis and probably treating things that really weren't cancer because we're treating them really early. But the point is that when you really get sick, if you're stage 3, stage 4 cancer, those numbers haven't moved. The needle hasn't moved on those in spite of billions and billions of dollars spent on this so-called cancer research. On the other hand, you have all these NIH studies going on about all this parasite drugs, and they're all doing positive, they're finding positive results, right? But they never want to admit that it could actually be that cancer is parasites. Now, that's kind of funny. It's like they each have an individual explanation for why that drug works. Oh, maybe it probably does something to the microtubules in one case, or it does something it changes the pH, or it does. They have all these different explanations, and I feel like, you remember that old game show, The Wheel of Fortune? Well, maybe it's still on, The Wheel of Fortune, and they spun the wheel, and then at the end there was you had to figure out what the puzzle was, and they would have letters on this puzzle, and then you had to sometimes buy a vowel. And now we have this puzzle sitting up there, and the question is, what causes cancer? And the answer is sitting on the board, and it's P blank R blank sites, and they're buying an O. I mean, this is how stupid this is. It's so obvious this is in front of them. And I will just tell you that if you go back in time, in the 1960s, there was a German group and at a university, at a big research institute, and they looked at this and they discovered that every cancer patient, not 10%, not 30%, but every cancer patient had parasites in their bloodstream and in their interstitial tissue. That's not a small point. Somebody should have taken that, but of course they couldn't get any traction. And in those days, there was not the alternative media. Thank God for you guys. I mean, that's what's changed this dynamic is in the alternative media, it is very hard to keep people and Facebook and all the stuff that they thought they were going to use against us. It's very hard to get people to not say to their friends, I just cured my cancer with fenbendazole or, whatever, ivermectin. I mean, I know somebody, that used a protocol that got over their leukemia with ivermectin. And again, you're only hearing that because it's being person to person on the internet and the alternative media reporting it.
You're absolutely right about that, actually,
because
because ivermectin is another one, again, an antiparasitic that has proven time and time again to be very successful against this. And so we've been reporting on it again on Media Blackout about the stories of people that have achieved complete remission using ivermectin. So what I want to know, Dr. Merritt. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, what do they say now suddenly? Just like your point about the RNA cancer protocol, the individualized, so suddenly comes out. What suddenly came out about ivermectin? Oh, ivermectin, it causes infertility.
Yes.
Now, again, billions of doses of ivermectin in millions of people in Africa have not only cured river blindness and all sorts of parasitic diseases, but women in Africa who have big families were not reporting infertility, over many years. But suddenly all this starts coming out and suddenly it's infertility.
Yeah.
And contrast that when the HCG was found in the polio vaccine that was given in, I can't remember the country, if it was Uganda or wherever it was, but it was the Catholic doctors that figured it out. The women came to them and said, we took your polio, it was not polio, it was tetanus vaccine. We took the tetanus vaccine and suddenly, we lost the baby. My neighbor's infertile, I'm infertile, whatever. It didn't take long to them realize it. So the idea that they could have had billions of doses of ivermectin and not realize that they were becoming infertile is highly improbable in my book.
Yes, I have to agree with you. I want to ask you about what is it that's really led to this discovery around parasites being, sort of the main cause of cancer? Is it the fact that people have tried drugs like this that were, demonized so much during COVID? Now it's backfired on them and people are using antiparasitics and all of a sudden they're much healthier. I mean, how have these discoveries come about?
I don't know how well, again, there was this stuff there was the evidence of the Germans floating around there, deep buried in the internet back doors. And I don't remember why Mr. Tippins decided to get onto fenbendazole. He can probably tell you. But the point is that once that was out of the bag, there was this underground thing I found about 5 or 6 years ago, underground group of people that were using fenbendazole and these things for cancer, and it was working. So when I started looking into it and discovered the Germans and the actual evidence that's out there, which everything that cancer likes, parasites like. Everything cancer hates, parasites hate. If you start looking at it that way, everything seems to fit. You don't have to make it fit. When you get correct ideas about the world scientifically, it all makes a nice, easy picture and it comes together well. Well, when I started doing that, I went to a friend of mine who had done exactly that. He had throat cancer. He had quite a bit of money and could afford to go down on his own dime to MD Anderson, but they couldn't get him in for 6 weeks. So his wife searched around the internet and found this story about the fenbendazole and started treating him using the protocol. And so he told me this story years ago. This is how I first found out. He told me this story and he said, I'm doing well, but I none of the people in my peer group down at MD Anderson are doing well. In other words, he was the exception. And then when I started figuring out, and his comment was, isn't it interesting that parasitic medication also treats cancer? You see, what they hadn't put together is, and I had to go back years later, I said, I got news for you. I think it's not that it also treats cancer, it's that cancer is parasites. That's the simplest explanation that fits all the facts that are coming out. And so what people were doing is they're using the fenbendazole, but they're still getting poisoned with and I'm not this is not official medical advice. I'm not telling people don't go through standard cancer treatment, but if you look at standard cancer treatment, it isn't so standard. Sherry Tenpenny, she one time she would tell her patients, she told me this story. She used to tell her patients that were going off because she doesn't treat cancer. She said, when you go to the oncologist, get more than one. She recommended getting 6 different opinions about how your cancer can be treated, and then make your decision what you're going to do. Well, they did that. And some of the patients came back and told her every decision was different. Every recommendation was different.
Yes.
They got 6 different, completely different programs. So that being the case, the answer is it's maybe not the best answer to take both treatments, because what you're doing when you're irradiating things and you're killing it with chemotherapy, you're also damaging you. You're damaging your ability to have an immune response to get rid of these things. What if you could just selectively kill the parasites and not kill you? And that's really the beauty of anti-parasitic drugs.
Yes.
I'll tell you that. Go ahead.
How does this also sort of tie in with the COVID injections? I interviewed Maria Chrysler this week. It's coming out later this week, who was talking to me about sort of synthetic parasites now, and all of these synthetic materials coming into our bodies. I mean, this is now complicating things even further, right?
Right. So I think we have to separate out things that act like parasites from parasites. I mean, I think that's fair to do. And the real parasites, they act like parasites, and they act like, it's interesting. There's a thing called a Levy. This is one of those weird factoids I just ran into looking around for things. There's a thing called a Levy walk, and the Levy walk is explaining predator action. If you've seen your little house cat or chase a mouse, for example, they don't just leap at it. What they do is they do a few little short steps, and they get themselves poised to try and find the best way to go after the food source, this mouse, right? And then after a few short steps and changing their position, if you watch them, then they leap on it. Then they go really fast steps to get to the thing. It's interesting that when they've looked at cancer metastases, they're not random. They do a Levy walk. In other words, they act like predators, which I think also goes along with parasites. They're looking for a food source. They eat up where they are, and then they've got to go someplace else. And they might go a little bit this way, a little bit that way, and then they zoom to the point where they've determined somehow that that's where they're going to go, whether it's hormonal or whatever. But I'm telling you, everything goes along with that. So the artificial parasites, though, are a different ball of wax. And I think in my opinion, how this relates to COVID is the vaccine knocked down people's immune system. So their internal parasites are coming out and they're taking over. That's the most simple answer to explain what we're seeing. Otherwise, you have to think that cancer in 2021 suddenly became a new disease with new principles. And I don't believe that. That isn't the way science generally sorts things out. So
Right, and we say this because of the quote unquote turbo cancer, right? I mean, it
Right,
all of
the
a
turbo
sudden,
cancer.
out of nowhere, just became an immediate death sentence for people.
Right. And again, if you think what's going on, probably what's happening is, and I can tell you, I probably would have been one of these victims. So I can tell you that story. But the point is, we see a prodrome of cancer, which is one of the things you see is night sweats and weight loss and things. But night sweats we always say, is a sign of cancer. But I can tell you from my own experience that you get rid of the parasites, the night sweats go away. So
Wow.
that's another little point in fact here, that this is not unrelated to parasites. It could be the same principle. That we saw, it's one thing when they talked about turbo cancer in adults. People that were oncologists realize this. They're seeing this. They're not saying much, but they're seeing people that were just completely doing well on their cancer protocol, and they've been doing well for a long time, then suddenly they take the vaccine and boom, this happens. Now, again, if nobody's going to think that vaccine itself causes cancer de novo, but do you really get rid of all, if cancer is parasites, it makes sense because you're not getting rid of all the parasites when you're doing cancer treatment with chemotherapy and radiation. That doesn't really treat all parasites. It just gets rid of the majority that were fast, bulky, and you debulk them with surgery and you deal with the fast reproducing ones, but you probably still left some. So now when you've gotten rid of the immune system, boom, they're free to roam and really go after you. I think that makes a lot more sense than thinking this is a whole new deal and we don't have an explanation for it. Additionally, on the other end, that also explains why the military guys, which shouldn't have turbo cancer. I mean, why? Another thing we don't normally see is young people having cancer breakout with multiple metastatic things like elderly people.
Yes, of
It's
course.
just not makes sense. So it does make sense if you think about it being cancer. And I'll tell you another, I believe that the Uber lords, whatever we want to think they are, they use predictive programming. And if you go back in time, there was a guy who looked at I think it was the Barcelona 2012 opening ceremony of the Olympics. And it showed, because he saw these blue balls that looked like what they claim COVID, the CGI that isn't COVID, but looks like that's what they want you to make it think, that scary looking spiky blue ball. Well, here was all these people dressed in these spiky blue balls, making a sea of them at this opening ceremony. And he's making a point about that. But he misses a couple of points. So I started really looking at that video. And when you really look at it, the first thing that happens is as the blue balls come in, you see these people carrying this weird looking, like almost like a brown lunar shaped pillow, like a semicircular kind of pillow, a crescent shape. Anyway, I thought, what is that? And then the other thing is there are these black ribbon-like things that break out, just suddenly burst out of these balls wandering around, just burst out. Well, if you've been looking enough parasite books and parasite things, the pillow is Trypanosoma cruzi. That's what it looks like under certain stains under the microscope. It looks like kind of a weird brownish shaped thing, and crescent shaped thing. And if you look at the German video, that actually I have this on my website, the German video of parasites in cancer patients, it looks like those black ribbon things breaking out of the red blood cells.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't think this is by accident. These psychopaths tell us what they're going to do, and they just assume we're too stupid to figure it out. But
I
think we'll
was
figure it out.
actually, and again, this is something that'll be in the interview that I did with Maria Chrysler, but the Daigle report had
Yeah.
predictions, and this is why I think this movie, Parasite movie, is so important for people to see right now, because the Daigle report, if we just revisit that briefly, this is reported by the Expose a little while ago. Apocalyptic catastrophe looms. Daigle's horrific 2025 depopulation forecast is supported by official excess death figures. And when you go down to look at some of the numbers, Daigle predicted in 2020, mind you, this was taken down off the Daigle website sometime in 2020, but they predicted that the UK population would decline 77.1% by the year 2025. The US would see its population decline 68.5% by the year 2025. And mind you, this is all at the year 2025 mark. Germany, 65.1%. Australia, 34.6%, which I find really bizarre because it's a highly injected population. But, maybe they were lying about those numbers. So it's really, really astounding when you look at what Daigle predicted. Again, this is a military source, that more than half of these countries would die. And when we see the eruption of things like turbo cancer, it makes perfect sense, because the current medical establishment has no answer for this, or at least appears not to. This is why I think this is such an important movie right now, Dr. Merritt, because it could save so many people's lives.
Well, and that's the other thing I think is happening. I think this scam is the mRNA concept, because if you look at mRNA, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this or a geneticist or anything, but I just read the literature, and the guys that are still doing mRNA research for cancer, which hasn't shown to be successful, by the way, but does kill the animals. The studies I've seen, the problem is that they now I lost my train of thought. They make the comment that, oh, this might be really useful, for example, in Africa, this mRNA technology, but we can't do it because we can't keep it cold long enough. They don't have an infrastructure to keep this stuff super cooled right up until the time it's administered. Now, let's just think about that. Did we keep all these vaccines super cooled? Of course we didn't. They made a big deal about super cooling down to very low temperatures the first 3 weeks of the rollout, and then it just kind of, as the news cycle moved on, they forgot all about that, and it went on the pharmacist shelves, and it sat there for a month or two, and then was given to people. Now,
Well, they were injecting people in tents, for goodness sake. Makeshift,
well, I know,
tents
and there's no
under all
the,
sorts of conditions.
well, I get it, and so my point is, how can this be mRNA technology? So I think the point about calling it mRNA technology. The other side I will say is when I looked up the half-life of all the mRNAs I could find, including these synthetic ones that they're talking about, the half-life is somewhere between 3.5 minutes and 16.5 hours. You can't even get out of the factory in 16.5 hours. You know, if you're a factory person, you know that. There's just no way this all makes sense. But what mRNA there, and notice that partway through the rollout, after denying it could get into your DNA, then suddenly, very, very creepily, MIT came out with an article that says, oh, we were wrong. We think now it can get in your mRNA and change you into a different mRNA, into your DNA. I think the point is to make you think that there's two big lies here. One, that it's safe and effective. And number two, that once you've taken it, there's no way out. Because they don't want people to wake up, take ivermectin, and not die by 2025. I think that's what's happening. So that's my message to people is, I can't say we're completely right. We're not being given all the facts. They've never told us what's actually in these vaccines. So we don't know everything. We are like groping in the dark, trying to make the best sense of this in the way old-fashioned doctors tried to treat people, by observation. And I'm just saying, it doesn't make sense what they're telling you, and don't be discouraged, because I really think they're lying to you about this being irreversible. If you took the vaccine, my best advice is do these protocols and clear out your body, clear out your liver, clear out your parasites, and then see what you've got. The other thing I will say is, when I looked up, Chagas disease has been a big problem coming across the border from South America for a long time. And we've been worried, some of us at least have been worried about it getting into the blood supply. If you look up the symptoms of early acquisition of Chagas disease, which is Trypanosoma cruzi, that pillow-like thing they carried into the Olympic Games, that parasite, it looks a lot like the symptoms that we're seeing in young people that took this vaccine. Or not just in young people. There's 30% of people that are asymptomatic. There's sudden death in a certain number of percentage. And then there's chronic acquisition of myocarditis and other things late in the people that don't follow in those two groups. So again, that looks a lot like Chagas disease. And I wouldn't put it past them that it would be more, I will tell you, technically, it's easier to put parasite eggs in a vaccine than it is to put mRNA and have it transported and be effective at the end where you inject it into people. So
I saw from the trailer, or one of the clips from the trailers, that there is also a discussion around the parasite eggs. So it's not just about getting rid of the adult parasites. If your body's not ready to combat the new ones that hatch, then you're also in strife. Talk to us a little bit about that. The reproduction of these things is unthinkable.
Right. And so I think one of the things we've learned recently, chlorine dioxide, by the way, is a very great, cheap method to get rid of parasites that can be used and transported and used for pennies. So it can be used to treat the poorest of the poor. You don't have to spend a lot of money on very expensive nitazoxanide or slightly less expensive ivermectin if you can't afford it. Everybody can afford pretty much chlorine dioxide. And what they found when they use chlorine dioxide, for example, in treatment of autism, or in my experience, just in parasite clearing, parasites rapidly reproduce. So there's a doubling time of some of these parasites that are about 2 hours. Unless you get the treatment inside that 2-hour window, or you have something that's so long lasting, you don't have to worry about that, it makes a difference. So you don't just treat yourself once for parasites or every once in a while for parasites. You have to have a program that meets the criteria of dealing with the new hatches and the doubling. Every time you have a mother parasite in you, depending on the type of parasite, it can lay hundreds of thousands of eggs daily. Now, most of them pass through you, but some of them become encysted in you. And what happens is, if you treat yourself a little bit, you kill the mother parasites, and these can be, by the way, we're not talking necessarily gut worms. We can be talking about the ones that are probably the cancer problems are these very tiny intracellular parasites. They don't really show up. They look under the microscope, they look indistinguishable in solid tumors from what we call cancer, and they're not being picked up by pathologists as parasites.
I was
So
just about to
they're
say they
very
won't even be picked up in tests as parasites.
They're very small. I mean, so they're not obvious to the naked eye or even the normal light microscopy. But whatever they are, they're doubling so fast that you have to have a constant treatment. And if you don't, when you treat yourself just a little bit, and I've got a video to tell people about this on my website, but when you treat yourself a little bit, you first kill the bigger mother parasites, and then they apparently, for their own survival, they put out some kind of chemical or hormone or something that stops the hatch out of the encysted baby parasites. But when you kill the mother, then suddenly you're going to have a big hatch out. And this is why, if you don't keep this going, those big hatch outs, first of all, when you treat yourself the next time, you'll get a flu-like illness called a Herxheimer reaction. And some of this we knew from old-time medicine, from treating syphilis and treating malaria and other things that we knew about some of this stuff. But some of the stuff we're learning as we go. But you have to treat yourself frequently, and you have to get in with
Sorry, if I can pause you, Dr. Merritt, a Herxheimer
Yeah.
reaction, for people that don't know, is what happens when
Yeah.
you
Well, a
start to
Herxheimer,
detoxify essentially from anything that shouldn't be in your body. And then as it's starting to get angry that it's leaving and leaving your body, it causes things like nausea, fever, flu-like symptoms, things
right.
of this nature. But it's not an indication that something's wrong. It's actually an indication that it's getting better.
Right. Surprise, your body doesn't like a bunch of dead parasites.
Yeah.
So if you don't treat yourself, frequently enough, you'll have enough parasites that branch out in between your treatments, that break out and grow, that when you treat them the next time, you've got a big load of dead parasites. And that's what gives you these reactions. So again, I can't believe that modern medicine doesn't know this, but it's surprising that try and find a parasite expert among standard medical doctors. We're all kind of learning, and we're going back. I have 4 generations of medical books in my house, which helps because you can go back and you can tell the old doctors knew a lot more about parasites than we do. They knew things. And, I thought it was a wives' tale about the idea that parasites hatch out at the full moon. But I'm going to tell you, based on night sweats, I can tell you that's what happens. And when you start observing yourself and you start observing what happens, like I say, I probably would have been a cancer victim because I had symptoms. I knew this when I was still on standard, big medicine, big pharma doctor. I mean, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, so I didn't give vaccines. I didn't give a lot of medications. But nonetheless, I was deep inside the system.
Right.
And I started having symptoms that I thought were like cancer symptoms, including night sweats, but I couldn't find a source. I mean, I had no reason to have it. I thought I was at low risk. Well, what happened was the minute I took an anti-parasitic drug, 3 doses, 3 days of that drug, boom, the night sweats went away and have never come back, except when I quit taking it for a while, and then it was at the full moon. So every time here, I'll tell you another one about parasites. Parasites control your behavior, and people need to realize that the CDC knows this. This is another shocker. The CDC knows that 40 million, I think they estimate on their website, 40 million Americans have toxoplasmosis. And this is a parasite that can get into your brain. There are other studies, Germany, various other different countries did this and showed that whereas schizophrenics have a much higher rate of having toxoplasmosis than non-schizophrenics.
Wow.
What does that tell you? parasites, turns out toxoplasmosis has to reproduce it. Part of its reproduction cycle has to take place in a cat. If we didn't have cats, we wouldn't have toxoplasmosis. I love cats. I've got cats, but I don't, I give them fenbendazole. I'll be honest. I don't let them get parasites. But what happens is if a rat gets toxoplasmosis in their brain, okay, the rat becomes not afraid of cat urine. They don't react. They don't move. They don't become afraid of cats. And so they get chomped by the cat. The cat gets the parasite back. It recycles in the cat, and then it goes back into the world. It's a beautiful system, but you see, it's changed. That parasite has changed the rat behavior so that it can keep reproducing. One of the
Wow.
things that we always say about cancer is that people on keto diets don't have as much problem with cancer continuing. In other words, people with glioblastoma, Dr. Blaylock showed this years ago. He could keep people alive for years. People that would normally have a 6-month life expectancy, he was keeping them alive for years on a super strict keto diet, no carbs. Okay.
Well, this is
Well,
because cancer feeds
because
cancer feeds
cancer
on
has to
sugar,
have
carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates.
right. Cancer has we have 2 ways of producing energy in the body, basically. And cancer only uses this one pathway that is dependent on carbohydrates. And that's also true of parasites. Most parasites only can do that. They preferentially like that pathway. So when you eat a low carb diet, you're starving your parasites. So what do parasites do? They give you carb cravings. Interestingly, I mean, this is how the world all comes together. Women report getting carb cravings the second half of their cycle, which starts at the full moon. Okay. And we always blamed it on hormones, but that's also when parasites break out. So I'm going to tell you, early on in my not cancer, well, I was cancer treatment, in my parasite protocol for myself, I remember just getting this really bad carb craving for like 2 or 3 days. I was just wanting to eat every carb in the house. And then I thought, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to try something. I took 24 milligrams of ivermectin, and boom, I'm not kidding you, within hours, no carb cravings.
Wow.
Went away. Now, again, this is not long-term double-blind studies that organized medicine wants, but they're also not willing to look at the basic principles of the scientific method, which is first make observations in the real world. And that's what we're doing.
Well, and I was just about to say, this sounds like the way that medicine used to be done before.
It was.
Before you had a globalist takeover of the pharmaceutical industry and modern medicine. I can't believe, Dr. Merritt, and I spoke about this a lot during the COVID era. You go to a doctor and you've seen it decline over the years. You're even a general practitioner, and you just say, I'm experiencing these symptoms. They're Googling it. They're Googling it and then prescribing you something based on a Google diagnosis. I mean, what are you here for? You're just here to write scripts? I mean, I can diagnose myself and probably have a better outcome by researching, okay, if I have these symptoms, then if I do this, I'll feel better, I could do that myself.
And that's really true.
What is the point of these people? And it's like they've all been so compartmentalized into this modern medicine, which is really just killing people. It's very rarely actually curing people. It's very rarely curing people. That's the problem.
We don't cure. I mean, they want clients, not cures.
Right.
But ancient medicine had several principles. Basically, don't poison yourself, detoxify yourself, get right with God, have a good diet, pay attention to your bowels and your urine. And if you did those things and get fresh air, sunshine, there weren't many treatments. And so, but they recognized that there were also general principles. Now, what we've done is, and I think this is the complexification and crapification of medicine, as Max Kaiser talks about economics. I love those terms. They've made it overly complex to confuse us about the fact that there are very few things that really make us sick, that we don't really have, all the different, they claim we have 70,000 different problems. That's when I started in medicine, there were like 7,000 or less in the ICD code of diseases, the International Code of Diseases. Now there are over 70,000.
Yeah,
And
with the
and so
introduction of glyphosate, maybe I don't deny that there's 70,000, you know, with all of the various poisons that they're introducing into our environment, into our food, you know,
right, but
there is more sickness.
right, but it's one thing. It's not 70,000 diseases. It's one poison. It's parasites. It's electromagnetic frequencies. It's not being in tune with God and the world around you, not getting enough sunlight. There are there are not that many things that are the cause of all this. We're not getting to the causes. We're getting to the end game of how it presents when you don't have enough sunlight, how it presents when you eat poison, how when you don't have mineral supplements, when you don't have enough minerals in the body. So deficiency diseases, we know about these things. You don't have to run around and try and make a precise diagnosis. That is the fallacy here. That's what they've been telling us since the time of the takeover of medicine in 1913. It's making, we spend billions and billions, probably trillions of dollars in this country on making a precise diagnosis so you can do just exactly what you said. So your doctor can look up the diagnosis and Google to see what the best treatment is. And I have to admit, I've done that. In the old days, we used to have books for this. Okay, you've got pneumonia, you're community acquired, you're elderly. Let's see what the best recommendation for antibiotic for you is. And we looked in a little book. Now they Google it. But the point is that it doesn't need to, it isn't that way. The really health and wellness is much simpler and it's much more profound. It has a few things that you can treat and you've covered your bases. I mean, I got to say honestly, I do a few things and I don't get sick traveling anymore. I used to, I don't anymore. And it's not that hard, and it's very simple. You don't poison yourself. You get adequate sleep. I detoxify with chlorine dioxide. I treat my parasites. And I supplement my minerals and eat correctly.
Right. It's
hard.
very simple.
Very simple.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about Parasite movie. What can people expect from it? I mean, I'm just looking at, I'll just go to the website briefly. We've got some amazing insight from quite a few people. We will be playing another very powerful trailer about the Rife machine after you and I are done talking. I want people to see this. Talk to us about what people can expect from this film.
Well, you look at the people on that list. I mean, they're real pioneers in all this. I'm kind of a Johnny come lately. I kind of just put things together and tried to get people to pay attention. But Royal Rife that you had there, he actually had an office. He was born about 20 miles from my office when I was in practice. But Royal Rife was interested in parasites. That's what he started looking at. And he started looking and he built microscopes in the old days that were so fabulous magnification, 15,000 plus magnification, that he could see all these things, right? We don't have the technology that he made in 1920. So you're going to hear about the history. You're going to hear about, I saw, Dr. Ardis and he'll probably talk about the artificial parasites. And the poisons, the toxins, how they've brought that to us. There's tons of stuff that are going to be brought out here. It's not just about cancer. I mean, it's neurologic diseases, and it's also parasitism. I think we have somebody talking about that. There's energetic parasites. I call the people running the world the uber parasites. I mean, in the essential, it's sucking off your life energy. And I think it's going to be covered in all its forms. So I think it's going to be really good.
Well, the autism link as well. Parasitic infections in
autism.
children and adults can lead to numerous neurological issues, including autism.
Right. And that's what, Carrie Rivera in her new book has come out and talked about. And there's another example of how they've improved their treatment and their ability to very scientifically, they're observing their autistic children, and they have scales that the mainstream medicine use, and they're showing how they can be made better by it's got to be, you really have to be consistent. Consistency is the key, and treat so frequently that you're inside that doubling time. So parasites must play a role in that problem as well. Some of these things we've proven. For example, we've proven MS. MS is pathologically proven to be parasites. So I think I'm looking forward to it. I expect to learn things.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait. What is it that you really want to what sort of message do you want to leave with people, Dr. Merritt? Because like I said, the last time you and I spoke, we were in very, very dark times, and it looks like that is certainly shifting, and humanity really does have better days ahead if we really take back control of our health, our government, our individual responsibility. Just start living this way again, and it looks like more and more people are committing to that. What do you want to leave with people?
Well, we've been convinced in modern world that we should be paying a lot of attention to the central government and to, get involved with the big health systems. It's all about systems and management. And what we have to do is take it back to the personal level. This is our individual bodies and psyches and freedom. So everything comes, take care of yourself, your family, and your community. And this can be done. And that way they can't stop you. That's what I would say. I think they cannot stop us regaining our personal sovereignty over our own bodies by not being afraid. The other thing is they've taught us to be afraid of these diseases because they don't want us to know what causes them. They want it to be like bolts of lightning that you can only save yourself if you get in bed with people in white coats, which I wore for 45 years, and listen to what they say and do exactly what they tell you. And what you end up with is taking 20 different pills that you can't possibly manage for 20 different things that are not 20 different diseases. You need to look at big principles. You need to look at what you can do on your own, in your own house personally, and not go running off to organized medicine because they're not solving the problems. They're not your friend, and they've been, in all fairness to my doctor colleagues, they've been victimized as well. I mean, they've been told things that simply aren't true. They've been led down a bad educational path. But the way we get out of it, they're not going to, it's like the criminals are not going to arrest themselves in this. We are going to have to make them irrelevant. You don't have to arrest them. You don't even have to hate them. Just make them irrelevant. Start taking care of your own health using basic principles. And that's hopefully what we're going to show you.
That's such a great message. And it's one that, I realized many years ago and really moved away from the pharmaceutical industry. And thank God that skepticism really helped me during COVID, because I knew you can't trust this. So many of us have been proven right throughout this entire thing. And it's certainly not, the case or some sort of a badge of honor. We were right. I never wanted to be right, Dr. Merritt. I wish I was wrong about all of this, but the fact is that we proved that critical thinking works, and certainly not trusting the system works. I'm hoping that with the appointment of RFK Jr., things are going to be better in the medical industry, but I would say it's going to take a long time. Even as you said, these doctors are victims themselves. They're all compartmentalized. They've been subjected to bad education, thinking that this is prestigious. This is the best that we have right now. And I'm really hoping that more and more doctors will come out of the system as well as it becomes more and more relevant, like the mainstream media, right? We'll have more doctors returning to actual medicine, and the days can certainly be better for humanity. But even if things don't get fixed like everyone's hoping for, taking personal responsibility for our health, educating ourselves outside of the establishment it can only better us as individuals. That's the way that I see all of this. So parasitemovie.com is where people need to go. Dr. Lee Merritt, quickly let people know where they can follow your work.
themedicalrebel.com, and I'm on Freedom Doc 1 on Telegram, and I have a Rumble channel, The Medical Rebel.
Well, we are very, very grateful for your time today. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll speak again in the near future.
Thank you.
Wow, an exciting time to be alive, ladies and gentlemen. Again, you can watch Parasite Movie right now for free. Tell everyone you know to head to parasitemovie.com. As promised, here's the powerful clip about the Rife machine to take us to the end of this broadcast. Visit parasitemovie.com. That's parasitemovie.com to watch for free.
The doctor said told me what he was going to do. And he said, well, there's good news and there's bad news. He said, what do you want to hear first? I said, well, give me the bad news. Let's do that, and then you can give me the good news last, and I'll feel a little better. He said, all right. He said, number one, we have to remove your stomach and esophagus. But he said the good news is that if you survive the operation and survive the chemotherapy, we'll put a tube in, and you use a blender to, now as your stomach, they'll grind up all your food, and people that do that seem to live longer. I said, well, the good news? He said, well, that's the good news. I said, well, what's chemotherapy? And he looked at me, and without batting an eye, instantly he said, it's FDA approved. So I tried to get out of him what chemotherapy truly was. He wouldn't tell me, so I wanted to see it. And when I saw the bag, it looked terrible. And there was a red skull and crossbones on the back of the bag, and the statement said, under no circumstances, even when this bag is empty, must it be cut open, death can ensue. And I said, well, you mean you're going to pump all this stuff into me, and then what's left will kill you? And I said, the address here is Missouri. I said, I'm going to Missouri. I walked out, walked right down, spent the $1,000 for a ticket to Missouri and back. Went to Missouri, and they wouldn't let me in the chemotherapy plant. I had to hire an attorney. There was a lot of kerfuffle. I finally got in. It cost me quite a bit of money to get into that plant. They were very nice. I got a full, complete rundown on chemotherapy. I have the chemical makeup of chemotherapy. They gave it to me. And I walked out with my attorney. It was all done and said. We left, and guess what? I was no further ahead because I'm not a chemist. I don't know what this chemical breakdown is. So I went to a compounding pharmacy knowing that they had a chemist in staff. And the man looked at it, and he looked at me and frowned and said, well, this is part of the war division, the chemical department of the armed forces. I said, really? He said, yes, and told me it was mustard gas.
A warning sign should be posted beside them.
After hearing that they were planning on pumping mustard gas through me, I decided to put an ad in the paper, and it read like this. My name is Wayne Rowland. I'm just like you. I have heard that there's a cure for disease that's been suppressed. I have cancer. I'm not going to accept the modality of the day. I need to know if there's a cure that's suppressed out there, and I offer a $10,000 reward. I literally received thousands of calls, but one man impressed me. One man. And he said, there's not one cure for cancer that's been suppressed. There's been 5. Which one do you want to know about? I said, whatever one works. He sent me to somebody that had an original Rife Ray unit.
Everything in creation spins and vibrates. Everything has its own prime resonance frequency. And this is why once we can identify the resonance frequency of a bacterium or an atom or whatever it is, we can then manipulate that object with its prime resonance frequency. Sound is the source of all creation. Sound and resonance is responsible for everything.
And I used it. 3 months later, the cancer was gone. So was my arthritis. So I started doing research into the Rife technologies, and I found another man who really knew quite a bit about Rife and had all the frequencies and everything, and I went to see him, and he became a friend of mine. His name is John Sajeka, and John Sajeka showed me that I wasn't using the Hertz rates to get rid of cancer at all. And that upset me, because I paid good money for this. Now, and why did the cancer leave? And I looked at the Hertz rates that I was using, and lo and behold, there were Hertz rates to get rid of worms and parasites. It turned out that the lead poisoning was giving a bed for parasites to breed in furiously, and it was their waste that had given me cancer. I was absolutely in shock. And the more research I did and the further I got into this, the more I found out that pretty much all disease is caused by worms and parasites.
Now more than ever, it is vital to be sure of what you're eating and where it's coming from. You may have seen recently that Coles announced their beef suppliers are now using Bovea to reduce cattle emissions. Bovea is known to cause male infertility, potentially cancer, and at this point, who knows what else. And Bovea themselves admit there are unknown safety risks to this product. We also aren't sure if other supermarkets or butchers have Bovea in their meat. Our friends at Stockman Steaks have guaranteed none of their beef is being supplemented with Bovea, so this Christmas, shop with Stockman Steaks and keep you and your family safe. They have a special promotion for the month of December exclusive to Z Media listeners. Spend $250 and receive a 4-pack of premium Wagyu burger patties. Spend $400 and receive 8 premium Wagyu burger patties. Head to stockmansteaks.com.au/Maria and remember to use the promo code Maria at checkout to receive your free goodies, and let your friends and family know to do the same. That's meat you and your loved ones can trust this Christmas. And to top it off, it's delicious. Head to stockmansteaks.com.au/Maria and use promo code Maria at the checkout.